this video, I would like to demonstrate how we can retrieve values from two text boxes, check to make sure they are valid numbers. If not, give the user an error message. And once they are corrected to be valid numbers, we can perform a calculation and display the results to the page. So this is my HTML. This is my text box for the tax rate. This is my placeholder for the error message. This is my text box for the cost of purchase. This is my placeholder for the error message. I have two buttons. One button will call the calculate function. The other button will clear all the values. In my window.onload section, each of my buttons will call a different function. One button will call a function to calculate the tax. The next button will call a function to clear everything. In my script tag, here is my first function, which clears everything. Here is my second function, which calculates my tax. So the first thing we need to do is we need to retrieve the value from the text boxes, of which there are two. So I use document.getElementById.value, that is the value property that returns what the user entered. I store it into a variable because variables are easier to work with. This is my second text box, the cost of the purchase. I store that value in another variable. The first thing I do, and I'm working with just one if here, I need to make sure that it's a valid number. This is the isNotANumber function. It is a JavaScript function. It takes one argument, and that is what we are checking. We are checking the tax rate. We want to make sure, number one, it's a valid number and it's greater than 0. So we're saying if it's not a number or it's less than or equal to 0. So if it's one of these two, it means there's a problem. We are checking to make sure that it's a real number and it's greater than 0. So if it's not a number, it's an error, or if it's less than or equal to 0, it's an error. And this is my OR logical operator. If this returns true, then the code inside will be executed. What I am doing is I am writing an error message to my placeholder. This is my placeholder. I'm setting the inner HTML property to this value. So if this returns true, the code inside the curly braces will execute and the if will stop at that point. Therefore, the user will go back and fix their code. So if I click the button, and notice they didn't put anything in there, it's going to tell me, please enter a valid number. And nothing will happen until I go back and fix it. Now I click the button again, and I get a second error message. Notice that the first error message did not disappear. We'll fix that soon. The point is, every time I click the button, I'm running the if. The if will only execute one section at a time before it returns true. If this value is valid, then we will read the else if. Now we check for the second text box. We want to make sure that it's a valid number. It's not less than or equal to 0. If it is one of these two, then we write the error message. In the final else, this is where we would actually write all our values, do the calculations. So the first if is checking the first text box. The else if checks the next text box. And then by default, if none of the above are true, the else will execute. Remember, our true means there's a problem. And because this is one if, else if, the minute something returns true, it will stop. So we will only be seeing one error message displayed at a time. Now when I go back and I put a valid number in, and I click calculate, there's my tax. Something else we need to do, as we're going through this progression, we need to remove the error messages. An easy way to remove the error messages is just to clear out everything at the beginning of the function. Remember, all of the action is happening when the user clicks on the button to call this function. So if we automatically clear out error messages, and we do that by setting the inner HTML property to an empty string. So now I will enter a tax rate, and it's giving me a message. Now I have fixed the error, but we see a second error. Notice our first error message is no longer there. The last thing we want to do, we want to clear out everything, including the results. It will look much more professional. So we need a function to do that when we click on our second button. So this is our clear all function. We are clearing out the error messages and the output using the inner HTML property. We are also clearing out the values in the text box using the value property. So we have two functions being called for two buttons. One does the calculation, one does the clearing.